Hey everyone, this is Mike from the Comic Book Trove, back today with another Omnibus review, and today I'm going to be taking a look at the Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 3. If you've seen my reviews that I've done in the past of Volumes 1 and 2, you'll know how much of a fan I am of this series. It really is one of my favourites of all time. It's so good. So I'm really excited to have this one. It means that we've now got the entire Bendis and Bagley collaboration collected in Omnibus format, which is a great thing to be able to finally say. So today I'm going to give an overview of this one, discuss it a little bit, showcase it, maybe help you make up your mind as to whether or not it's a book you want to pick up yourself, although if you're an Ultimate Spider-Man fan, your mind is probably already made up on this one. But nevertheless, let's go through it anyway, because it is no doubt a really cool collection. First of all, let's look at the dust jacket. What we've got here is the standard variant cover. There were 3 options in total. This one, though, was the one that I preferred. It was the homage cover by Mark Bagley to Amazing Spider-Man issue 100. Originally a John Romita cover. Great homage here, great tribute to that classic cover. Really liked it. Around the rest of the dust jacket then, we've got the spine matching the design of the first 2 volumes, so all 3 are going to look great on the shelf. We know there's a volume 4 coming as well, so I have no doubt that's going to match up perfectly, and I'm looking forward to that. And when all 4 of these volumes are out, no doubt they're going to be a great set. On the back, we've got the cover gallery then, the issues collected in here. Down there, you've got your little blurb just confirming what we've got in here. But this is issues 72 to 111 plus annuals 1 and 2. A huge chunk of material, and like I say, that is the remainder of the Bendis and Bagley run on the series. So, a pretty big milestone. You know, for a long time, there was only the 1 volume of this collected in omnibus format. It's been great to see Marvel finally commit to collecting the rest of it in the last couple of years. On the hardcover itself, I really like this because it's one of my favourite scenes. It's a great issue. As you can see, there's a lot of characters here. This is from a storyline where Spidey gets involved with a lot of the kind of street level characters. So Hammerhead, Elektra, Black Cat, Daredevil, Iron Fist, Shang-Chi, Moon Knight. It's really fun and it's a great big fight scene. Yeah, a really nice use of that for a wraparound image on the book. Let's dive inside a little bit then, and I will give my usual spoiler warning here before we go any further, because, you know, as I do with a lot of my favourite series, this is something I do want to talk about, certainly as I go through it, and I'll be discussing things and showing stuff off that will probably spoil some stuff if you've never read this before, and I certainly highly recommend you do read this. So if you've never read it and you don't want anything spoiled, fair warning as always. But as we open the book, we've got this initial kind of credits page showing everybody involved in here. So the writer being Brian Michael Bendis, he wrote everything on this series. It was really quite amazing just how much he wrote. Then the main penciler being Mark Bagley, but we also see Mark Brooks, who illustrated the 2 annuals collected in here. And then right at the end, we get the introduction of who would be the artist to succeed Bagley, being Stuart Immonen. So, you know, plenty of great creators in here. Obviously, beyond that, we've got the inkers, the colorists, letterers, and everybody else. So plenty of great names to mention there. But then beyond that, we just jump straight in. So there's no contents page in here, which is a little bit of a shame, because I do think it's cool when they do include a contents page, but it doesn't matter too much. On every issue, we do get the actual cover, obviously, and then you get the issue number and the kind of story title. So you have a good idea of where you are as you go through the book. And really, what I'm going to say about this is just going to repeat a lot of what I've already said before about the previous volumes, because really it applies to this whole series. Ultimate Spider-Man is really one of the most consistent stories, one of the most consistent comic series I've ever read in terms of something that maintains a really high quality, literally from start to finish. There are very few dips in Ultimate Spider-Man. This was something that when I first read it, it was just like a total joy to read it from start to end. It honestly was. And because it has that same creative team for such a big part of it, you know, Bendis and Bagley, it had this great ongoing feel of consistency to it. So it really does feel like one long story. So throughout here, you're getting a lot of what you've seen before. So the great kind of attention paid to the personal life of Peter Parker, the character development of him and Mary Jane and Aunt May and everybody else who's in here who plays such a big role in the story. Bendis did such a great job of kind of developing all these characters throughout the series. Bagley's artwork, you know, the funny thing is, you know, aside from this series, Mark Bagley is really not one of my favourite artists, but I can't think of somebody who could have done a better job on this series. The look he gave this book, so distinctive. and it just really gave it that feel of something that's taking place in its own world, something separate to the 616 Amazing Spider-Man stories. I don't know. People maybe disagree on that one. I'm sure some people do, but I just think that, honestly, Bendis and Bagley's team up here that we're seeing, the rest of the conclusion of really in this book, it's something special. Famously, everybody talks about how they broke that long-standing record of Stan Lee and Jack Kirby for long-standing writer-artist collaboration. Obviously that run on Fantastic Four that Lee and Kirby did was broken by this one. The record was broken. But they really did a great job. Honestly, this was just so fun. And we see some really cool stories in here. So we see like a Hobgoblin saga featuring Harry Osborn, which, is its own take on the classic Hobgoblin story. The introduction of then Hammerhead and, referring kind of back to that cover image on the hardcover. This story arc featuring Moon Knight, Daredevil and a few other characters, which ends up being really cool. A lot of great Spider-Man action. Obviously, that kind of goes without saying. But what always felt great about Ultimate Spider-Man was how the Peter Parker stuff was always just as interesting as the Spider-Man stuff. And that's something I've always said is such a key component when it comes to great Spider-Man stories. When you get something where the Peter Parker stuff is just as interesting to read as the Spider-Man stuff and vice versa, that's kind of when you know that a writer / artist have really hit the nail on the head and kind of nailed a Spider-Man story. Seen some artwork here by Mark Brooks. So this is the only stuff in the book that you're going to see that's not illustrated by Mark Bagley, other than a few pages in the final issue in here by Stuart Immonen. But Mark Brooks is a great artist and did a good job on these annuals, no doubt about that. But really, it's kind of like hard to say. I don't know. I mean, there's no one thing that makes Ultimate Spider-Man so good. It's really a few different things, but I just think that it really captured the essence of what makes this character so great. And like I said, because it felt like one ongoing story, and it really does, as you read through it from beginning, certainly to the end of this run anyway, the collaboration between these two creators. It really was such a strong book. I really like the development here. We see a lot of focus on the development of the relationship between Peter Parker and Kitty Pryde, who we see here in a costume. Really kind of fun, cute relationship that those two have. Really liked that, really enjoyed that. She ended up being a great supporting character in this series, Kitty Pryde. And, she's one of my favourite X-Men from the 616 anyway. She's a great character. I think she was handled really well here. I'd say she was actually handled much better in Ultimate Spider-Man than she was in Ultimate X-Men, which is a little bit ironic, but that's really only because Ultimate Spidey is so much better than Ultimate X-Men, in my opinion. But yeah, she was a great character. She ended up being pretty much a key member of the supporting cast for quite a while, because even beyond the stuff in this book, Kitty ended up sticking around and played a different role in this book as well, and that was really cool. That's this story here where you get the ultimate version of Deadpool, Ultimate Universe version of Deadpool. This is a pretty interesting story where Spidey gets kind of pretty much roped into an X-Men story. They all get captured and taken to this island where they're sort of being hunted for live TV. It's pretty crazy stuff. But it's all just really, really cool. And then, beyond this, we see, ultimately there's a Clone Saga story here. There's a Morbius story. There's just a lot. There's a lot of stuff going on here, and it's all so great. I'm not going to talk about it all. I'm not going to try and dive into it all in detail, because it's really tempting to do that, but I'm just not going to do it because it would make this video so long. There are certain books that I just feel the urge to kind of go into every little detail about. Maybe at some point I will do that for Ultimate Spider-Man, because this is a really, really great series. It's something I hold in such high regard. If you haven't checked this out, I really do recommend you try and read Ultimate Spider-Man from the beginning, whether you do it in these omnibuses that are out now or some other format. I mean, originally I read it all digitally, so there's always that option. But this is just, without a doubt, some of the best Spider-Man storytelling that there's really ever been. And I say that as somebody who's a big fan of the classic stuff, so I really like, going way back, the Lee Ditko stuff, and then the Lee and Romita era. and then other classic stuff like Roger Stern, and then like David Michelini and Todd McFarlane's run. You know, I really like classic Amazing Spider-Man and all those sorts of eras, but I really do think that this is something I probably slightly prefer over all of that. This probably is, I don't know if I've committed to saying this before because it's always so hard to decide, but this probably is my favourite Spider-Man run. It really is so great. We start to see then here, we're looking at pages from the Clone Saga. Now, the original Clone Saga is one of those super infamous stories, you know. It turned a lot of people off comics, I know, back in the day. Rightly so, because it was a convoluted mess. And I've seen it said before, and I kind of agree, that one of the great things you can say about this run is that somehow Bendis managed to tell a story, a Clone Saga story, that's good. You know, first of all, it's a lot more concise than the original Clone Saga story, so it's got that going for it. But the fact that this makes sense, that it's actually a genuinely good story, that it fits with the rest of the series up to this point, at least in my opinion, is a pretty amazing achievement, because the original Clone Saga is something that I do not recommend reading. It's not a book that I've ever enjoyed. But what you do get here, I mean, the most significant development during this story, which I will touch upon, as much as I'm trying to resist diving into every detail, I can't resist this. So back in the content of the material, I should say, in Volume 2, Gwen Stacy was killed off by Carnage. And then in this Clone Saga story, Gwen comes back. Now, the specifics as to why she comes back, how she comes back, I won't really go into all that here and now. It is a little bit strange that she comes back at all, but it works well enough. I mean, I thought it was fine in the end. The explanation as to how she came back was certainly a bit weird, but she was a good character, and I was quite happy to see her come back. But this also ties in with the point in the story where Peter reveals to his Aunt May that he is Spider-Man, and that doesn't go great at first. And then you see the return of his dad. Apparently the return of his dad. There's a lot going on in this Clone Saga story. It probably is the weirdest story arc in the whole run. But like I say, it's somehow still good. So we do see the return of Carnage. It kind of turns out that the Gwen that's returned, she sort of is Carnage. And then that kind of gets dealt with. Yeah, it's honestly, this is really tempting to just kind of go in on every issue and break it all down issue by issue. But it's just really, really good. Just take my word for it. If you haven't read it, which you probably have, if you're even watching this at all, chances are you're familiar with it. But yeah, really cool book. And obviously this character here, another great character to come out of this Clone Saga, is the ultimate version of Jessica Drew, who turns out to be a clone of Peter Parker. She's like a female clone, so she shares DNA with Peter Parker in, I think it's like almost 100%, except for the fact that she's female. So every other aspect of her is the same. She even has his memories and everything. His personality, his memories, but she's just a female version of him. But she ends up taking on this identity. Really cool costume design for her as well, gotta say. Yeah, and it all kind of culminates in Doc Ock turning up. Doc Ock, who's been a key recurring villain throughout the series, as you know, as he always is in Spider-Man comics anyway. But then, really great series here. Really great conclusion to this in the series, because it turns out he's been pulling the strings. And it kind of reveals that he doesn't even need tentacles, because he's got Magneto-like magnetic powers, where he can just manipulate metal, and he just manipulates them into tentacles that he forms out of random metal junk. But you get splash pages like this, and I've got to say, this particular omnibus has really, really good binding in terms of minimal gutter loss, because there are a few instances of spread pages like this where you really don't notice much gutter loss at all, which is pretty rare in an omnibus, I've got to say. But anyway, in the fallout from that story, because it doesn't end there, we've got a few issues beyond that in this collection. Mary Jane was kidnapped by one of the creepy Peter clones, and we do see her kind of dealing with a little bit of the stress and the fallout from that. But their relationship is really great. I think that one of the key plus points of the storytelling in here was that aspect of the Peter and Mary Jane relationship, which was always kind of going up and down. It's a classic kind of teen drama. It's something that, for me and for many others, I think it just reminds you of, and it takes you back to that time in your life where relationships were like that, because there's a lot of that kind of high school drama where things that, as you get older, things that are so inconsequential and ridiculous, but back in the day when you're that age, it seems like a big deal. Really takes you back, and you can kind of, I can anyway, you can kind of relate to how Peter and everybody felt at that point in time. I don't know, I just thought it was well written. But we see some of the story here then, with Peter teaming up with Daredevil and some of the other kind of street level characters. I think, Iron Fist and Shang-Chi. Black Cat gets involved. Yeah, it's and they're all taking on the Kingpin, basically. It ends up being a really good story as part of what is just a really good series. Honestly, this is just really, really cool. And one of the best issues in here, actually, is probably the final issue, which is issue 111, which was, we're starting here, The Talk, as it's called, which is where Peter and May finally get together and talk about the fact that he's revealed to her that he is Spider-Man. And they have this really nice heart-to-heart conversation. And this is a good example of something that happened a few times in this series as well, because Ultimate Spider-Man wasn't always about, every issue having to focus on a lot of action. There were quite a few issues where it was more story-driven, more character-driven like this. And I love the fact that there were issues like this involved, because it's just two characters having a conversation for an entire issue. But it does so much towards developing the characters further. It accomplishes so much in that sense. And basically, they just discuss the practicalities of Peter being Spider-Man, what it means for his life going forward. They talk about Uncle Ben, why he decided to be Spider-Man in the first place. It's a really kind of heartwarming conversation, and you see, here the first images of artwork and contribution to the series by Stuart Immonen. So it's a cool kind of hybrid issue where you've got Mark Bagley's farewell, but also, introducing the new artist who would take over from issue 112 onwards. And obviously we'll see all of Immonen's run in volume 4 of this when that does come out. But the thing about this issue as well is that technically it actually makes for a fairly good jumping off point. We talk so much about jumping on points when it comes to reading comics. I don't think that jumping off points get quite as much focus. And although I do highly recommend reading beyond this issue, if you were to read Ultimate Spider-Man, because there's still good stuff beyond this. But the way that this issue ends, you could technically stop reading it here, because it all just comes to a point where May accepts Peter as Spider-Man, and he just kind of goes off, and you get this final page here where he's just going off to do some Spider-Man stuff. If you never read beyond there, it kind of feels like an ending, and I think it's really cool that Mark Bagley was able to go out on a real high note and allowed to leave the series on a point where it genuinely felt like a goodbye. But obviously, like I said, there's more to come, and I do recommend reading that. But we've got the extras section here then. As always, we get a lot of cool extras in the back, so a lot of classic covers from the series, a lot of sketches and character designs by Mark Bagley. I think there's a little bit of Mark Brooks artwork in the back here, but pretty much mostly Bagley stuff, as you'd expect. And it's it's really cool. It's not the biggest extras section, but I think it's just about right in terms of how much you get and how interesting it all is. Overall, kind of goes without saying, there was no doubt I was ever going to have a different opinion than this, because I knew exactly what I was getting with this one, really. But a really great collection, an excellent third volume of this series, and it's just great that we're finally going to be getting a volume 4, and in my case as well, a reprint of that Death of Spider-Man Omnibus, because I don't have that either. So with volume 4 and then that, and the 2 Miles Morales omnibuses, which I've already got and which I've reviewed on the channel already, the entirety of Bendis' Spider-Man, his whole ultimate story, will be collected, and that's, for me, for others, I'm sure, a big collecting goal that will be achieved when that day comes, when they're all available. So yeah, that's Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 3. Hopefully that was interesting and insightful, and let me know what you think of this series. You know, I'm certainly happy to hear the opinions of others when it comes to this book. Like a few others I've talked about in particular, this is a real highlight series for me. It's something I really loved reading through the first time I ever did, and it's something I'm really happy to be gradually getting more and more of in the omnibus format. So thanks as always for watching. You know, that's appreciated as always, and I'll be back in soon to discuss something else.